The detailed learning objectives of this chapter are that the learner will be able to recognize the importance of the oceans as a source of food for many people, to describe the basic principles of marine ecology, including the importance of phytoplankton as the basis of sea life, energy flow in food chains, the complexity of food webs, and the role of bacteria and viruses, nutrient cycle. To describe the difference for marine life between open oceans and coastal seas, and to recognize that many IMO regulations are connected to this difference. To recognize the diversity of marine life in the marine environment. To recognize that life in the sea starts and ends with the smallest of organisms, plankton, bacteria, and viruses. Role of the oceans in human life. Seafarers and the sea. Click on the thumbnails to learn more. Over 70% of the surface of the world is covered with seas and oceans. These oceans play a very important role for human life on Earth. They provide food, supply oxygen, regulate our climate, and are economically important in many ways. Fish is the most important source of protein for many people around the world. Of all food products, fish is traded most. Over 200 million people work in the fishing industry. And that is only fish, while the oceans offer many more natural resources. For example, the oceans provide 50% of the natural gas and 30% of the crude oil we use worldwide. Without the oceans, world trade would be very different. About 90% of world trade takes place by ships crossing the oceans. Especially for seafarers, the sea is a special place. It is their daily working environment. But the sea is much more than a blue highway. It is teeming with life. The sea is a place worth getting to know better. Life in the sea. Primary production. Food chains. The 10% rule. Bacteria make food chains circular. The role of viruses. Food web. Click on the thumbnails to learn more. Mention life in the sea, and most people think of large animals such as whales, dolphins, seals, and fish. These large animals are fantastic, but there are really not that many of them. The vast majority of plants and animals in the sea are very, very small, and crucial for the existence of life in the sea. Without these tiny animals and plants, there would be no whales, dolphins, or fish. Very small green plants are at the root of almost all sea life. These green plants, or algae, are part of the plankton in the sea and are called phytoplankton. Plankton is like a soup of very small organisms that drift along with the sea currents. Algae are the primary or first producers in the sea, using sunlight to turn carbon dioxide and water into sugars. This process is called photosynthesis. Primary production is the production of sugars through photosynthesis. Photosynthesis has oxygen as a byproduct. Together with rainforests, these tiny algae in the oceans produce most of the oxygen that people breathe. On land, we are quite familiar with the primary producers, which are the trees and other green plants. However, most primary production worldwide comes from the sea, from green algae. While algae only represent 1% of all plants on Earth, it is responsible for 50% of the world's primary production. If you look at algae under a microscope, Their shapes are spectacular, and their diversity is enormous. Algae and other green plants need nutrients to build organic compounds other than sugar. When these green plants are eaten, sugar and other compounds are passed on to marine animals in the food chain. A simple marine food chain starts with algae which are eaten by very small animals called zooplankton, animal plankton. Zooplankton in turn are eaten by small fish, such as sardines, that filter the plankton. Eating gives energy. Energy is passed on to higher levels in the food chain. Organisms use a large part, 90%, of this energy for basic life processes, such as movement, breathing, eating, and reproduction. Therefore, organisms only use 10% of their energy to grow, to gain weight. The story does not end at the top of the food pyramid. To keep the system going, nutrients need to be recycled to feed the small plants again. Here, bacteria play an important role. At every level of the food chain, waste is produced. Waste includes feces and dead organisms. Bacteria break down the waste produced in the food chain, and this releases the nutrients. These nutrients are used again by algae. This way, food chains become circular. Large amounts of bacteria are needed to get this job done. 1 milliliter of seawater contains over 1 million bacteria. There are even more viruses than bacteria in the sea. They also play an important role in the recycling of nutrients. Many marine viruses infect algae and zooplankton. The viruses kill these organisms and help bacteria to release the nutrients. 1 milliliter of seawater contains over 10 million viruses. The total weight of all viruses together is estimated to be that of 75 million blue whales. All the food chains in the sea are connected with each other in more complex food webs. After all, most organisms eat more than one type of food and can be eaten by more than one type of predator. When one species becomes more or less abundant due to whatever reason, this is likely to have an effect on the abundance of other species in the food web. The sea consists of areas with very different characteristics. The ocean can roughly be divided into open ocean and coastal sea. The coastal sea is the shallow area less than 200 meters deep. These waters are close to land and contain many nutrients, thanks to rivers entering the sea. The open ocean is relatively deep, on average 3.7 kilometers. It is a nutrient-poor environment. There are clear differences between open oceans and coastal seas, such as amounts of nutrients, penetration of sunlight, temperature, and salinity. Living conditions for marine life in open oceans are very different compared to coastal seas, with differences in types of plankton, levels of primary production, and lengths of food chains. Many environmental regulations are based on the differences between open oceans and coastal seas. Algae types. Levels of primary production. Lengths of food chains. Click on the thumbnails to learn more. Sunlight and nutrients are essential for algae to grow. In the open ocean, plankton are small and round. Being small minimizes the risk of sinking to deeper waters where no sunlight penetrates. Being round means it is easier to absorb the few nutrients there are. In coastal seas, plankton are larger and have more complex shapes. More nutrients are available here, so plankton grow larger, which makes them heavier. But because water in coastal seas is turbulent, even heavier cells will reach the surface again due to the water movement. Primary production is the production of sugars by green plants. The abundance of nutrients in coastal seas results in high levels of primary production. Because of the limited amount of nutrients in the open ocean, primary production levels are low. Coastal seas are a lot more productive than open oceans. In coastal areas, algae are relatively large and primary production is relatively high. Here, food chains have 4 levels. In the open ocean, plankton are much smaller, and therefore the zooplankton that eat these algae are smaller as well. Therefore the food chains are generally longer in open oceans, with 6 levels. Seas with longer food chains are less productive. Remembering the 10% rule, this means that in an open ocean area, more algae are needed to produce the same amount of fish at the top of the food chain when compared to coastal areas. As a result, in coastal areas, more fish in kilograms can be found compared to open ocean areas. The sea consists of areas. The sea is not only a blue highway, it is also teeming with life. It is not a uniform mass of water with the same species and amounts of organisms everywhere. Coastal seas are very different from open oceans. But in almost all marine areas, algae are at the base of the food web, energy is transferred to animals higher in food chains, and nutrients are recycled by bacteria. It is the very small organisms, plankton, viruses and bacteria, that are very important for the more visible life in the sea, such as fish and marine mammals. Life in our seas and oceans is diverse, complex, abundant and often spectacular.